The conclave to select a new pope is set to begin in just a few moments. The word conclave, well, it essentially means with a key, which is fitting because soon the doors of the Sistine Chapel will close.
More than 130 cardinals are gathering in Rome this week for the start of the papal conclave.
In the middle of the beautiful city of Rome, something unusual is happening. Behind the tall stone walls of the Vatican, where peace and prayer usually fill the air, there are now whispers spreading from one corner to another. These whispers are not about gossip or trouble, but about something strange and surprising that no one expected. A new conclave is about to begin, a very special meeting where the most powerful leaders of the Catholic Church come together to choose a new pope.
Catholic cardinals from around the world will gather for the conclave.
This event is normally full of deep respect, prayer, and calm thinking. It's supposed to be a time when everyone in the church feels united and hopeful. But this time, something feels different. People are starting to notice that things are not as simple as they seem. Some of the cardinals, the men who will vote in the conclave, are looking more serious than usual. Behind their quiet faces, there are worries. Not because of a scandal or any big fight, but because of strange events that have happened recently. Events that have made many leaders stop and think. There are rumors that something big is about to change. It's not just the names being whispered as possible new popes, but a strong feeling that something unexpected is about to shape the future of the church. This conclave doesn't just feel like another vote. It feels like a turning point, a moment that could change everything. So what's going on behind those closed doors? Why are even the most confident leaders looking unsure? And what could this all mean for the future of the church? Stay with us, because what happens next might become one of the most important and unforgettable moments in the church's recent history. Whispers before the conclave, a strange feeling in the air. Before the grand doors of the conclave even closed, something felt strangely off. The Vatican, usually known for its calm and sacred atmosphere during such times, seemed different. The marble halls, where people would typically move with grace and quiet reverence, now felt heavier, like the air was charged with a sense of anticipation that no one could fully explain. As people walked through these ancient halls, they couldn't help but notice the difference. There was something in the way the cardinals walked, the way they spoke, and even the way they looked at each other. There were more quiet talks happening than usual, and strange, meaningful glances being exchanged. It was as though the very air was filled with an unspoken understanding, but no one was ready to say what was really on their minds. It wasn't the usual warm sense of peace and faith that you might expect in such a sacred place. No, this time there was a certain tension, a feeling that something was about to change. It wasn't fear, but it wasn't peace either. Cardinals, who usually walked with their heads held high, exuding confidence and certainty, now looked deep in thought. Their faces, normally full of composure, seemed weighed down by something much larger than just the task at hand. It was clear that these men, who had spent their lives in the service of the church, were now facing a moment of deep reflection, a moment when the future seemed uncertain. Even the visitors and workers who passed through the Vatican on their daily routines could feel it. Something was in the air, but no one could quite put their finger on it. Some whispered that it was just the nerves that came before such an important event. After all, the conclave was about choosing a new leader for the Catholic Church, something that would affect millions of lives around the world.
The cardinals of the Catholic Church from around the world have gathered here and will enter under lock and key to begin the process of electing the next pope.
Others suggested that it was the weather, as if the foggy skies outside had somehow seeped into the very hearts of those gathered within the Vatican walls. But most, however, believed that there was something deeper going on, something that couldn't be explained by nerves or weather patterns. Why were some cardinals arriving earlier than expected, slipping into quiet rooms for secret talks and private meetings before the official start of the conclave? Why were some of the most influential men in the church refusing to speak to the media, as if avoiding the spotlight altogether? Normally, In the days leading up to the conclave, there would be a buzz of activity, interviews, debates, and gatherings of people who were eager to discuss the future of the church. But this time, it felt different. The usual excitement was replaced by a quiet, almost eerie stillness. Normally, before a conclave, there is a sense of unity among the cardinals, a sense that, no matter their differences, they are all working toward the same goal, the spiritual leadership of the church. There is a shared faith and understanding that they are part of something bigger than themselves, a tradition that spans centuries. But this time, something was off. The air was filled with uncertainty. The usual sense of faith that permeates the Vatican was overshadowed by a quiet unease. Something was happening, but nobody knew what exactly. The cardinals, known for their deep faith and respect for tradition, seemed less sure than usual. Their faces held more questions than answers. They weren't rushing to make decisions. Instead, they were taking their time, thinking, talking in hushed voices, and looking at each other with a sense of caution. There was a noticeable change in the way they interacted. It wasn't the usual smooth flow of polite exchanges and hopeful discussions. It was a tense quietness, as if they were each waiting for something to happen. The whispers began to spread faster. Why were some cardinals staying away from the media, refusing to engage in interviews, and keeping their thoughts hidden behind closed doors? Normally, before such a high-profile event, there would be a media frenzy, with everyone eager to hear opinions and predictions. But now, the silence was deafening. Some began to wonder if there were deeper concerns at play, issues that went beyond the simple task of electing a new pope. What if the church were facing a more complex crisis, one that no one was ready to speak about out loud? Was there a fear that the church's future was hanging in the balance? Was the conclave more than just a selection of a new leader? It was about choosing the direction of the church for the next generation? These questions hung in the air, unanswered, as the cardinals walked through the hallways of the Vatican.
As the world watches, the cardinals facing reporters entering the Vatican,
Each one carrying the weight of centuries of tradition on their shoulders. There was a sense that they knew more than they were willing to reveal. That, despite the calm exterior, something was shifting, and the outcome of this conclave might not be what anyone expected. This wasn't just another conclave. It wasn't just another election. The quiet atmosphere, the hushed conversations, and the uneasy glances were a sign that this time, something was different. Something that could change everything. Mysterious names and secret talks. Inside the Vatican, the conclave isn't as simple as just sitting down and casting a vote. No, the process is much more complex. It's filled with long discussions, heated debates, and even a bit of behind-the-scenes politicking. The cardinals don't simply gather and make a quick decision. Instead, they take their time, carefully considering each possible candidate for the papacy. It's a momentous task, one that affects not just the church, but the millions of lives that depend on its leadership. But this time, things felt different. Something strange was happening. As the days passed and the conclave began in earnest, certain names started popping up. At first, they were mentioned in whispers, almost like secrets that no one wanted to say out loud. These were names that surprised many of the cardinals and those watching from the outside. Some of the names being thrown around were people who were nowhere near the top of the usual lists. These weren't the typical frontrunners, the ones who were expected to take the lead. Instead, these were fresh, unexpected names. Why were these people suddenly in the spotlight? What had changed? And more importantly, who was behind this sudden push for them? For many, it didn't make sense. The names being discussed didn't fit the usual mold. They weren't the traditional choices, the ones who were seen as safe or familiar. And yet these names kept surfacing, over and over again. The whispers spread like wildfire through the Vatican halls, sparking curiosity, speculation, and a bit of confusion. What was happening behind closed doors? Some people began to wonder if there was a new group of cardinals working together to steer the church in a completely new direction. Was there an effort to break free from tradition? Were they hoping to choose someone bold, someone who could shake things up and bring fresh ideas to a church that many felt was stuck in the past? The thought of having a leader who wasn't bound by old expectations was both exciting and unsettling to many. A bold, unconventional choice could bring change, but it also carries risks. Could the church handle such a shift? Was it too soon to make such a big change? The more they discussed it, the more the cardinals seemed divided. Some were excited about the possibility of a new direction, while others were deeply worried about the future. Behind the scenes, the private meetings grew longer and more intense. Cardinals were seen huddled in dark corners of the Vatican, engaged in whispered conversations that no one else could hear. Some of them even skipped group dinners to hold additional talks in smaller, more intimate settings. There was a sense of urgency in the air. This wasn't just another conclave. Something much bigger was at stake, and it was clear that the decisions being made behind those closed doors would shape the church's future for years to come. What was so unusual about these secret talks? Why were some cardinals going out of their way to keep their conversations private? Normally, discussions like this would take place openly, with everyone having their say. But now, there was a different kind of secrecy, one that hinted at a shift in how things were done. The cardinals were still deeply rooted in their traditions, but the walls of the Vatican seemed to be closing in on them. The decision they were about to make wasn't just about choosing a leader, it was about choosing a new vision for the church itself. Some of the cardinals were starting to speak in hushed tones, their eyes darting around to make sure no one was listening. The names being discussed in these private talks weren't just the usual candidates, but people who could bring something new, something different to the papacy. And yet, as the days went on, the uncertainty grew. The question on everyone's mind was simple. Would they make a bold decision, or would they fall back on the safe, traditional choice? The tension in the air was palpable. As the conclave continued, it became clear that there were two very different visions for the future of the church. On one side, some wanted a steady hand, someone who could maintain the traditions and practices that had guided the church for centuries. On the other side, some wanted a radical change, a new pope who could take the church in a different direction. It wasn't just about picking the best person for the job. It was about choosing which path the church should follow in the years to come.
The conclave to elect a new pope to lead the world's 1.4 billion Roman Catholics.
The cardinals' private talks grew more intense, and the walls of secrecy began to close in around them. It was no longer just about who would lead the church. It was about what kind of church they wanted to lead. And that question wasn't as easy to answer as anyone had hoped. What happened behind those closed doors in the Vatican wasn't just a matter of choosing the next pope. It was about choosing a new future, one that would affect millions of people around the world. And for the first time in many years, no one could predict what would happen next. The twists and turns of this conclave had only just begun, and no one knew for sure where they would lead. A cardinal with a secret? Then came the biggest surprise, the rumors about one cardinal who might be hiding something far deeper than anyone had anticipated. His name hadn't appeared on the early lists of likely candidates for pope. His name wasn't even a part of the usual group of front-runners. But suddenly, out of nowhere, he seemed to be everywhere. Whispers about him filled the halls of the Vatican, traveling faster than anyone could keep up with. People began to talk about him as though he were the next big thing. They spoke of his undeniable charm, the way he could light up a room with his smile and his words. He had a presence that drew people in, making them want to listen to him, even when he wasn't saying much. But there was more to it than just his appeal. As the days went on, more and more people began to focus on his bold ideas. He didn't just want to maintain the traditions of the church. He wanted to push them forward, reshape them in a way that could address the challenges of the modern world. His ideas were fresh and forward-thinking, and many cardinals saw this as exactly what the church needed. They admired his courage to speak out, even when others were playing it safe. However, the most intriguing part of his story was his past. That's when the whispers began. Some of the more seasoned cardinals, those with long histories in the Vatican, began to hint that there was more to this man than what met the eye. They spoke of a past that the church, for unclear reasons, seemed eager to forget. Rumors swirled about a controversial time in his earlier career, something that had been buried deep, far away from public attention. Some suggested that it was a scandal of sorts, though the details remained vague. Others believed it was simply a decision he had made in his youth that now seemed out of step with the church's current image. But whatever the rumors were, one thing was clear. His past was clouded, and yet it didn't seem to matter. The more people learned about him, the more curious they became. There was a strange magnetism around this cardinal, and it wasn't just because of his past or his ideas. It was the mystery that seemed to follow him wherever he went. In a place like the Vatican, where everything is meant to be sacred, where everything is supposed to be transparent, his ability to remain an enigma made him stand out even more.
Cardinals will meet in a conclave, or locked room in Latin.
He spoke little in public, offering only the bare minimum when it came to answering questions or making statements. Yet, when he did speak, people listened. And even though he remained a bit of a mystery, his influence was undeniable. The secrecy around him only seemed to fuel his growing popularity. As the conclave continued and the days grew longer, the pressure was building. Could this cardinal, who had only recently emerged as a possible candidate, really become the next pope? Many of the cardinals were asking themselves that very question. Could the church afford to take such a leap of faith on someone who was so mysterious, so different from the usual leaders they'd come to expect? Or was this the twist that everyone had been waiting for, the unexpected candidate who would disrupt the calm and bring something entirely new to the church? It wasn't just about his bold ideas or his past anymore. It was about the role he could play in shaping the future of the Catholic Church. The whispers were growing louder. Some were convinced that he had powerful allies who were pushing for his papacy, and they were working behind the scenes to make sure he had the support he needed. Others thought that his candidacy was simply a distraction, a red herring meant to throw off attention from the true contenders. Was he just a smokescreen, a way to shake things up without actually making any real changes? Or was he the real deal? Was he the one who could lead the church into a new era? The uncertainty around him only seemed to make people more fascinated. And yet, despite all the attention, the cardinal himself remained largely silent. He rarely spoke to the press, and when he did, his words were carefully chosen, always avoiding revealing too much. His behavior was calculated, and people could feel it. He wasn't giving away anything, no personal stories, no statements about his beliefs or his plans for the future. Instead, he spent most of his time in private meetings, talking to small groups of cardinals in hushed voices. No one could quite figure him out. Was he truly the leader the church needed? Or was he hiding something even bigger? In a place where everything is supposed to be known, where the cardinals are meant to be transparent and open about their intentions, this cardinal was a mystery, and that in itself was a game changer. The Vatican wasn't used to dealing with people like him, people who didn't fit the mold, who didn't follow the usual script. His presence in the conclave was unsettling to some and exciting to others. But no matter what, one thing was clear. The twist everyone had been feeling was now unfolding, and it was centered around him. As the days passed, it became more and more evident that this cardinal was no longer just a name in the background. He had become a major player, and his next move could change everything. Old traditions versus new voices. One of the biggest challenges inside the conclave was the silent battle between old traditions and fresh, new voices. It wasn't just about who would wear the white robes next. It was about something much deeper, about what kind of future the church would choose. Would it hold tightly to the old ways that had lasted for centuries? Or would it take a bold step toward change? Some cardinals believed that the Church should not move from its roots. They felt that the traditions, prayers, and teachings that had guided believers for hundreds of years were strong for a reason. These older cardinals often spoke about the importance of stability. To them, the Church was like a great tree, its roots deep in history. According to them, the Church couldn't keep using old answers for new problems. This wasn't the first time such debates had happened, but something about this conclave made everything feel sharper, more serious. The world outside the Vatican was changing fast. People were more connected, more opinionated, and more curious than ever. Many cardinals believed the Church had to decide whether to stay as it was or become something different. And this conclave, this very moment, might be the turning point. There were long talks, calm but filled with emotion. One group of cardinals said, "We must stand strong. If we change too much, we lose what makes us the Church." The other group replied, "If we don't change, we'll be left behind. People won't listen anymore. They already feel unheard." Stuck in the middle were the undecided cardinals. These were men who could see both sides. They understood the beauty of tradition, but also saw the pain of people who felt disconnected from the Church. These cardinals carried a heavy burden. Everyone knew that their votes could decide everything. They spent long hours thinking, praying, and listening to others. Every conversation, every glance, every quiet walk through the Vatican gardens mattered. Outside, the world waited. Journalists whispered guesses. Believers prayed for guidance. And inside those stone walls, a quiet storm was happening. A storm between holding on and letting go, between the comfort of the old and the hope of the new. The conclave was no longer just about choosing a pope. It had become a crossroads where two visions of the Church were meeting, clashing, and hoping to shape the future. The twist that shocked the Vatican. Just when everyone inside the Vatican felt they had everything figured out, just when people thought they knew who the next pope would be, something unexpected happened. A surprise twist flipped the entire story on its head. During one of the final vote counts, a name that barely made headlines in the early days suddenly jumped to the top of the list. It wasn't the most obvious choice, and it wasn't someone many had been openly supporting. But there it was, a moment that took everyone by surprise. Whispers turned into gasps. People looked around the room in disbelief. Some smiled quietly, while others looked confused or even concerned. The twist had finally arrived, and it hit harder than anyone had imagined. This man wasn't from one of the largest countries. He didn't have decades of power behind him. He wasn't a famous speaker or a strong favorite in the media. Yet there was something different about him. He had been calm, respectful, and most of all, he listened. While others gave long speeches, he sat quietly, hearing what others had to say. He asked questions. He showed patience. And that's how he gained something more important than attention. He earned trust. One by one, cardinals who hadn't made up their minds began to lean his way. Maybe it was his gentle presence. Maybe it was his bold but quiet ideas. Or maybe it was because he didn't seem to want power for himself. Whatever the reason, votes began to shift slowly at first, then all at once. The final vote was tight, closer than anyone had expected. Tension filled the room as the last names were read. Then it was done. Soon after, white smoke began to rise above the Sistine Chapel. The signal was clear. A new pope had been chosen. Outside, people watching the chimney broke into cheers. Bells rang. Reporters rushed to spread the news. All over the world, eyes turned to the Vatican. But the first question on everyone's mind was simple. Who is he? When the name was finally announced, there were stunned looks around the globe. Some people were excited, others were unsure. Many had never heard of him. But as his story started to unfold, People leaned in, curious to learn more. Why had he been picked over others? What did the cardinals see in him that others didn't? Most of all, what did his election mean for the future of the church? Was this the start of a new chapter, a different kind of leadership? Or was it simply a message that change can come from the quietest corners? One thing was certain: the Vatican had just witnessed a historic shift, and the world was watching closely to see what this new pope would do next. So now, the world holds its breath. A new pope has been chosen, but this was no ordinary conclave. From the start, something felt different, and now we know why. The path to this decision was full of whispers, unexpected names, and powerful moments behind closed doors. But more than anything, it was filled with one big twist that changed everything. This new pope isn't just stepping into a role, he's stepping into history. People everywhere are wondering what kind of leader he will be. Will he bring big changes? Will he hold on to old traditions? Or will he do something new that no one saw coming? Only time will tell. But one thing is sure: this conclave will not be forgotten. It reminded the world that even in the most sacred and structured places, surprises can still happen. That deep inside the oldest walls of the church, new stories can still begin. And sometimes, the person no one expects becomes the person everyone needs. As bells ring across cities and churches, as people look to the sky in hope, a new chapter begins. This is more than a change of leadership. It's a moment that could guide the future of millions. A moment that could shape the soul of the church for generations to come. So, whether you're watching from a faraway country or standing right outside the Vatican walls, one thing is clear: something big just happened, and who knows? The twist that began in this conclave might just be the spark that lights a whole new fire of faith, hope, and change across the world. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Because history isn't just made in books, it's happening right now.